I'm going to, in the chat, do provide a link to our Google Doc presentation. So if you do want that, I'll let that go through first before we get started. So hi, everyone. Thanks for taking your time to join us today. I'm Rebecca Mushter. I'm a white female in my early 40s with chin-length blonde hair and black glasses. I teach in the Department of Art and Design and serve as the Associate Dean of Graduate Studies at the State University of New York at Oswego. Amy and I started this project together when I was the Associate Director of our Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching and focused on teaching and learning at the undergraduate level.
Hi, I'm Amy Fisk. I'm the Assistant Dean for Accessibility at SUNY Geneseo. I'm a white female in my 30s with shoulder-length brown hair, though up in a bun right now, and I have brown glasses. I oversee the Office of Accessibility Services, which coordinates accommodations and supports for students with disabilities. My background is in school psychology.
So here's a quick overview of what we have for planned for our session today. First, we'll share a brief overview of our research project and its relationship to some other existing research. Then we'll move into providing a little context about the environment and conditions our students faced in 2020 in their own words. And then we'll share our findings organized in 3 themes: community and belonging, organization and structure, and flexibility and choice. Each theme includes student stories, summaries of the data collected, and a talking point you might consider using with colleagues. Finally, we'll wrap up with an opportunity for questions and discussions. And I'll note that we will pause after each theme to see if there's questions related to that and try to address them when they're relevant. To get us started, to set the stage for our session and our research, we'd like to ask everyone to take a minute or so to reflect on how you personally define or describe accessibility and how that compares to ways colleagues and students at your institution might describe accessibility. So we'll pause for a minute if you want to take a moment to think or share your ideas with each other in the chat. So again, how would you define or describe accessibility? And how do others at your institution describe accessibility? When we first started increasing our accessibility efforts on my campus about 5 years ago, I found I was often using the word accessibility really differently than my colleagues. We found that many faculty and staff would use the word accessibility to mean affordable, available, and/or online. We also found that most of our colleagues weren't aware of the differences between accommodations and accessibility or how they work together. We've also experienced some resistance to supporting disabled students, in part because their voices are often left out and not sought out. They're not at the decision-making tables and their stories aren't heard. So when these perspectives aren't present, it's easy to assume these students don't exist, right? Just like if accommodation letter isn't presented to a faculty member, there's often an incorrect assumption that there are no students with disabilities in the room. And we know that that's not true. Amy and I embarked on this work together in order to listen to, collect, and share stories and perspectives of our students who have yet to be invited into policy, curricular, and co-curricular discussions. We hope you can use some of these stories as talking points to move conversations forward on your campuses too.
We have a few comments in the chat on thoughts on what accessibility means. Making sure everyone has the opportunity to demonstrate their true potential. I love that. Accessibility is the absence of accommodations. I love that too. No need for individualizing accommodations when it's accessible for all at the start proactively. Thank you. Just a description here of our initial project goals. So within our respective roles, with me being a disability services provider and Rebecca as an instructor, we wanted to explore the student perspective on benefits and barriers they experienced in that shift to remote learning. And from those narratives or stories, identifying what instructors and institutions at large can do to better support students with disabilities moving forward. Essentially, what are the lessons that we've learned during this time? So we know the pandemic hasn't gone away, and we know that the effects long-term certainly won't. The landscape of higher education has changed. I think we would all be in agreement with that. It has shown a brighter light on inequities that students as well as faculty and staff face. We've demonstrated more accessible practices that can be done and should continue to be done. And we're shifting our expectations and our practices, which is a good thing. Our main goals for conducting this research initially was to provide information for faculty training, find out ways that we can support student learning regardless of teaching modality, and try to overall enhance student and faculty knowledge of available supports, accommodations, and technologies. So for our study, our students included those who were enrolled in their respective disability or accessibility services office for each of our institutions for at least one semester. They were currently still enrolled and part of a traditional age group. A majority of our students were white, female, and just under 30% identified as a first-generation student. We had a total of 40 participants, 16 from my college at Geneseo and 24 from Rebecca's college at Oswego. Students were asked multiple choice and open-ended questions that they could answer at their own pace in an online form. We used Qualtrics, or in a one-on-one interview. We wanted to provide flexibility and choice and model practices. Participant responses were completely anonymous. We used Deduce, which is an online coding software to code and analyze responses. I want to point you toward a few related studies that have been done in the past year or two that have very similar methodology qualitatively. And the results demonstrated what best practices are in supporting students with disabilities in the classroom. So these are noted in a resource document that we will be providing later on. That is the SURU COVID-19 survey, which was conducted in 2020. The ECAR technology needs of students with disabilities in 2019. And then another great resource is from AHEAD, which we should all know AHEAD, the Association of Higher Education and Disability, their COVID-19 research repository, which is on their website. So I encourage you to look through those studies as well. Good reads, good tangible strategies, and from student voices. Again, some of our initial goals were about collecting the data, finding out about those barriers and benefits that students had experienced. I think our initial goals were to find out what specific technological or technical barriers students experienced in the remote learning transition, or how remote learning was actually a benefit, and using this data for professional development purposes. But diving into the data, trying to relate to the students through their stories, our thought process about this project kind of changed, or rather it expanded. We started thinking about accessibility more holistically and what that actually means for us in our practice with our own students. Really thinking about what are the barriers? How can we reduce barriers and provide pathways for student success? We recognize the importance of the student voice in all of this, that it needs to be included in discussions about accessibility and accessibility initiatives. I find that disability is often left out of not just conversations within a DEI lens, but also DEI initiatives in action. Disability should be included in discussions on diversity and social justice, but it's also important to recognize that these identities are not mutually exclusive and play a role in student success in college, including but certainly not limited to gender, race, and socio and economic status, which we'll talk about further on today. So going back to school a little bit, as we developed our main themes, we noted that relationships and feelings of belonging were prominent themes within our student stories. Social integration theory asserts that the extent to which a student perceives others in the campus community as caring about them personally, having an interest in them, the more integrated and the stronger relationships they develop, the more likely they are to persist at the college level. Other predictive factors like SAT and ACT scores, prior academic success, yes, those things are involved, but community and belonging play a notable role. And this is particularly true for students with disabilities. Students' peer groups, relationships with faculty, the institution at large, all play a really critical role in students' sense of growth and achievement and self-efficacy. It's all about relationships and belonging.
As we've looked and re-looked at the student stories we collected, we've realized the three key themes we've identified map really well to self-determination theory developed by two psychologists, Ryan and Deci. Self-determination theory is a theory of motivation that says that people need to feel relatedness, competency, and autonomy to be intrinsically motivated to grow and learn. Although students use different language, they routinely pointed out how their psychological needs, like those outlined by Ryan and Deci, were met or not met based on how accessible the content and materials were and how their accommodations were handled. Our identified theme of community and belonging is closely related to the concept of relatedness, which is the innate desire to be connected to others and to be a part of something larger than oneself. Our students need to feel like they belong to our learning communities and to our larger fields of practice. Our identified theme of organization and structure is closely related to the idea of competency. Competency is when people feel like they have the right tools and skills for the challenge that they're facing. We like just enough challenge to feel like we've achieved something, but not so much challenge that we don't know how to kind of approach a problem or a task. And consistent and dependable structure and scaffolding can be really important to feeling competent in a learning environment. And then our final theme of flexibility and choice speaks to the concept of autonomy in self-determination theory. Learners often feel more in control when they can make decisions about their own learning, including a pace that works for them, and can choose how to represent or share their knowledge. So as we transition into our student stories, we want to first provide a little context. Our interviews were conducted specifically about student experiences with emergency remote learning and collected in summer and fall 2020. 95% of our respondents indicated that they had at least some experience with online learning prior to the pandemic. That was 95%, right? So about 60% had taken at least one fully online course. About half of our students had experience with learning management system platforms, and almost 60% had sought out independent learning experiences like tutorials on YouTube or LinkedIn learning courses, that sort of thing. And although our students have experience with online learning, it's really important to note that what our students experienced in 2020 was emergency remote learning and not online learning, right? Before we move forward, there is a quick question in the chat about noticing that a lot of surveys indicate that a lot of the participants are female. And if we had any suggestions as to why that might be. And I want to toss that maybe to Amy to ask her if maybe that's the kind of representation she's seeing in her office.
Of course, representation largely varies among schools. I think that is representative of the population that is connected to Disability or Accessibility Services Office in general. And I think there's a few different factors in that. One, because females are more likely to seek out assistance and more likely to, again, seek out assistance, describe challenges that they might be experiencing. I think there's a cultural component to that of males not feeling comfortable with self-disclosing and acknowledging that they're experiencing challenges. So again, I'm purely hypothesizing here. I think there's a cultural component to that, but also just reflective of the numbers that we have. We tend to have more females that are connected to disability services offices at the college level. I hope that answers your question, but that's a really important acknowledgement.
Thanks, Amy. So, in talking about the remote learning experience, one student noted the following about their home learning environment.